I was 7 when she was stillborn and then brought back. I remember sitting outside the glass doors of the maternity ward and hearing someone crying, but it wasn't a wail of my new baby sister. Looking back on it, it was probably my mother, but I was at the stage of life when I thought my parents would never cry, so I sat there wondering who it could be. I sat and waited for so long that my old yellow Game Boy ran out of charge and shut down. The waiting area had a fluorescent bulb that flickered every once in a while. I stared up at it blankly and counted the flickers. The hours ran late, and I was beginning to nod off when the glass doors finally opened. A high-pitched baby's wail filled the room. My parents came out with big smiles on their faces, holding close a bundle of blankets where my new little sister lay nestled, waving her tiny fists. My mother's belly had shrunk. She looked pale and fatigued, but nothing could compare to the amount of pure joy in her bloodshot eyes. My parents thanked the nurses lingering behind them and picked me up to go home. I remember how the nurses looked terrified and how as we left the hospital and my father put the car into gear, shadows of people had crowded around the windows of the maternity ward to stare down at us. Even before my mother told me the story of what happened that night, I could tell Maya was special. She had the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen, and when her little pink head began to grow a fuzz of hair on top, it was silky and so light in color that it bordered blonde and silver, unlike my unruly mess of brown hair I struggled to brush every morning. She was pretty in the contagious way a tiny, giggly baby girl could be, and she was a treasure to my mother, who said time and time again that Maya's laughter sounded just like hers when she was a little girl. I sometimes wondered why Maya looked so different from me, but it was only when I turned 11 and Maya 4 when I cared enough to ask my mother about it. When I did, my mother's expression turned serious. She pulled me into her bedroom, something she never did, and closed the door behind us. Her eyes were resolute, as if she was telling herself, "This is it, I have to do this now." Then she took a deep breath before telling me. "Maya was touched by an angel," she said in a hushed tone. I looked at her incredulously. We went to church every Sunday where the pastor would talk about things like angels and ghosts, but I was a skeptical 11-year-old with a cynical science teacher, and I had just started to suspect the pastor was full of baloney. "An angel," I said. "Like with wings?" My mother's lips pulled into a tight smile. "Angels who come down to earth hide their wings, Rose. They look just like us." I crossed my arms and frowned. "Then how do you know it was an angel?" "She performed a miracle," my mother said. There was a frozen look in her eyes that scared me a little. "What was the miracle?" I asked, still unconvinced. "She brought your sister back," my mother said. Then she smiled. "My little Maya, she came back to life." I stared at her, disbelieving. My mother seemed to realize what she had said and cleared her throat. Maya giggled out in the hallway, playing with her toys. "Sometimes, angels are as fearful as they are magical," she said quickly. "Now, go to your room and pray to her. Thank her for bringing Maya back into our arms." I prayed a little more earnestly that night and the nights after. I wasn't sure why, but the way my mother had spoken struck me as strange and a little frightening. Years passed, and Maya grew up to be treasured by not just my family but everyone around her. Wherever she went, she was adored and, when she became old enough, respected. She had a quiet but contagious smile that put anyone she spoke to at ease, and she knew how to carry herself with grace and dignity. Perhaps it would make sense if I envied her, but I didn't. She was especially sweet and caring toward her older sister, and we were inseparable. I picked her up from school, she went to college while I worked, we moved in together. We were so close that I could practically see what she was thinking just by looking at her. I prayed every night to the angel who brought her back. All was well until, during the winter 2 years ago, my father was shot dead in the back alley of our old neighborhood. My sister and I drove back immediately. While my mother wept at home, we braved a visit to the police station. They told us we couldn't see the detainee, but Maya insisted that we at least be granted that small favor. The man who had murdered our father sat in his jail cell silently. When my sister and I walked up to the bars, a ghost of a smile crept onto his pale lips. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. Maya turned away in disgust, as if she was done with her business. As soon as she did, the man locked eyes with me, winked, and mouthed something. I didn't catch what. My father's burial was held in the small cemetery 3 blocks down the road. It was mostly attended by family and friends, but there was an unfamiliar woman in a sleek black dress that my mother seemed particularly agitated by. The woman let a slender white lily fall onto the casket in the frozen ground and turned her pale, perfectly made-up face toward us. As soon as she did, our mother stepped to interpose herself between her and Maya. "Mrs. Allen," the woman said, her breath turning to white mist. My mother was usually a very calm and composed person, but there was a tremor in her voice when she spoke. "You," she said. "You're back. You seem surprised. I thought you would be expecting me." "I should have known," my mother muttered. "Is this it? The tragedy?" "Of course. I suppose the weight of a tragedy is seldom expected." And then the woman trailed off, her lips curling into a small smile. Tears had welled in my mother's eyes. I couldn't read her expression, it looked like a strange mix somewhere between anger, fear, and guilt. The woman eyed Maya, who glanced warily between her and my mother, trying to make sense of their words. "I see that your younger daughter has grown up well." My mother stayed silent. "I would like to talk to her." Immediately, my mother's face blanched. You can't. "Mrs. Allen. Your business is done here," my mother said, her voice now audibly shaking. A few heads turned to look at her. "You took your payment. Now leave." The woman looked disappointed. She turned to Maya. "Please, come with me." Maya narrowed her eyes. "What's going on here? Why do you want to talk to me? There are people who wish to see you." "No," my mother said. "Maya, don't listen to her." "Mrs. Allen," the woman in black cooed. "You can't do anything to stop me." My mother shuddered and fell silent. The woman turned back to Maya. "Please." Maya grudgingly stepped forward. My mother and I followed. The woman frowned. "Please stay behind, Mrs. Allen." I carefully cleared my throat. "You may come with us if you'd like, Rose." "You know my name? Your mother has told me." I looked to my mother for confirmation, but she gave me none. Her face was ashen. "Come," the woman said. "We'll be back here soon." "Mom, go," my mother said, with some difficulty. The strange woman led us down the street to the canal, where Maya and I often played when we were little. The flecks of snow melted into the dirt by the banks, and the murky water moved slowly. We walked along the waterside until the cemetery disappeared into the cold wispy fog and fir trees behind us. "So, what's this about?" Maya asked. The woman smiled lightly with her perfect cherry lips. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" she said to Maya. "You're a young woman now." "Who are you?" the angel I blurted out. Both Maya and the woman turned to look at me. "You're supposed to be the angel, right?" I said, shifting nervously. "The one who brought Maya back." The woman smiled. "Is that what your parents told you?" We walked onto one of the ugly concrete bridges over the canal. The woman leaned against a railing as Maya watched warily. "What does that mean?" my sister asked. "Brought me back?" I used to tell her when she was small and sick that she would be okay because she was loved by an angel, but she must have forgotten. I hesitated to tell her the whole story, as my mother had carefully avoided it ever since the first conversation she had with me. In the uneasy silence that followed, the woman laughed. It wasn't sinister laughter, but it somehow still made me feel uneasy. "Angels don't exist, Rose," she said. "I'm just a simple businesswoman. Your mother called for my service when your sister died." I felt myself stiffen. When I stole a glance at Maya, her eyes were wide. In the distance, the wail of police sirens filled the air. "What services?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. The woman reached into her black satin purse, pulled out a small black card with white lettering, and handed it to me. "The traitors," it read. "A miracle in exchange for a tragedy." "What is this?" "My card," the woman said. "Should you ever need it as well? My contact information is on the back." I flipped the card over. On the back was a phone number and an email address printed under a name. Anastasia L. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "What did you do for my parents? What does this have to do with Maya?" The woman, Anastasia, smiled. The traders consist of service providers for unusual requests, she said. Your parents' request was to bring their stillborn second daughter back to life. An impossible request, certainly, but part of our service is working out with our client a satisfactory alternative. My blood ran cold. Alternative? You don't think your mother would have liked carrying a child in her womb for 40 weeks and getting nothing but a corpse in return, do you? We decided to bring a child into your family's life that day, just as if your baby sister hadn't died. I looked at Maya, and she looked at me. We were perfectly in tandem, always, because we were sisters. But she was blonde, always too blonde, and her eyes too blue to have come from anyone in our family. Maya said haltingly. I'm not Mom's daughter? Anastasia shrugged. That depends on who you choose to accept as family, she said. In any case, it shouldn't matter anymore. If my fellow traders have done their job, the woman who raised you is dead by now. What? The wail of police sirens hadn't faded. Muffled ever so slightly by the fog, it was coming from the direction of the cemetery. A tragedy in exchange for a miracle, Anastasia said simply. That is our business. In exchange for creating a perfect family that lasted 20 years, we have come to watch you fall apart, one by one. Maya swiveled on her heels and began to run, back towards the cemetery where our mother had stood with us just 10 minutes ago, but she stopped short at the sight of the dozen black-clad men who had gathered at the end of the concrete bridge. There's no reason to run, Anastasia cooed. It's too late to save anyone. And wouldn't you know it? Your tragedy dovetails perfectly with my new client's miracle. The crowd of figures shifted, and I saw them. Coming down the neighborhood streets to the waterside, walking hastily at first, and then running. A poorly shaven man with the brightest blue eyes, and a haggard woman with silky hair so light it was somewhere between blonde and silver. The numbness shattered and reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Maya wasn't the tiny lump I had felt kicking inside my mother's round belly when I was 7. She wasn't a baby girl I had waited to see in the waiting room of the maternity ward. There was no angel. There was no magic. Maya, our miracle, had been stolen by my parents and Anastasia. I stood and stared numbly as the man with the bright blue eyes ran up to us and swept my sister into his arms. The woman with the silky hair was crying, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks that dimpled just like Maya's. Our little girl, she sobbed. We've finally found you. Close to my ear, there was a small metallic click. My muscles were stiff, but I managed to turn my eyes to Anastasia. In her hand, held up to my temple, was an ornate silver pistol that looked like it belonged in an antique shop. You are the last to fall, she said. Why are you doing this? I whimpered. It is our business, Anastasia said simply. The world can't be all miracles. I wanted to call for Maya, but my voice was stuck in my throat as I watched her get smothered in her parents' embrace. I wanted to call for my parents, but they were dead. If what Anastasia had told us was true, the traitors had killed them. My father was gone. My mother was gone. I would die too, and Anastasia's new clients would take Maya away. A tragedy in exchange for a miracle. I would have chosen to do anything else if I could. I really would have done anything better if the choice was in my control. But it wasn't. So I told Anastasia the only thing that came to mind. I want a miracle, I croaked. A smile crept onto her perfect cherry lips. What is your miracle, Rose? I want to live. Is that all? I want my family back. Anastasia chuckled, just loud enough for me to hear. What remains of it shall be yours, she mused. And let there be tragedy to my clients who wished for the miracle of being reunited with their stolen daughter. The pistol shifted away from my head, and with 2 swift shots, Maya's parents were dead. I only write about this now. I confess to you what I have done, because lately I've become afraid. My payment is due soon. My tragedy is finally coming for me. My parents got 20 years after their miracle until they met their tragedy. Maya's parents got 2 minutes. The contract that Anastasia made me sign after my miracle mentioned nothing of a timeline. My tragedy would manifest whenever the time was right. It's been 4 years since the traitors spared my life, shot Maya's parents, caught my sister as she tried to run away, and brought her back to me. They had been waiting there knowing. Anastasia and the rest of the traders are smart. Each of their services makes room for more. Maya's parents needed a miracle because their daughter got stolen away. I needed a miracle because I had to escape my parents' tragedy and get Maya back. The traders are rooted deeply in the shadows of every part of society, I'm sure of it. Their connections run deep. Undoubtedly, that was how they kept my parents from police scrutiny after a baby was stolen from the hospital. Undoubtedly, similar connections are at work for me. Even after police reports went public on the case of Lucas and Sarah Findeber, whose decomposing bodies were found in the canal some weeks after gunshots were heard in the area, investigators have never come to my door. I've got to think the traders had a hand in that. Maya is smart too, and sometimes she makes it difficult for me to keep her in my basement. Just last week she tried twisting up a bent nail from one of the floorboards and using it as a lockpick. But Maya and we grew up doing everything together. Like I said before, I know exactly what she's thinking just by looking at her. She must know that I only want to keep us safe. Out of our family, biological or otherwise, she and I are the only ones left now. We need to look out for each other, no matter what happens. Yet she seems insistent on endangering me by letting the world know she's still alive. She keeps struggling to escape. But I digress. Last night, I saw a face staring at me from my second-floor bedroom window. Pale, smiling, knowing. The skittering noises in my attic that I told myself were just mice are growing louder and more frenzied. I think I hear my front door creaking open and closed sometimes in the middle of the night. My tragedy is coming for me. And now, as I hide under my moldy kitchen sink listening to the gentle footsteps creaking around my floorboards in the living room, I want to leave you with a final warning. There is a reason I didn't publish Anastasia's contact information. You shouldn't make a deal with the traders. Any miracle isn't worth it. Not just a tragedy, but also the sheer terror that pervades your life leading up to it. The footsteps have ceased. Whoever it is, they're here in the kitchen now. They're pulling something out of the cabinets. The whetstone. I don't know how they figured out where I keep it. Even if you don't know how to contact Anastasia, I know the traders will find you first if you are in a position where you need a miracle. Please, just push them away. Save yourself the experience of cowering under your kitchen sink in your old family home and listening to a stranger sharpen a knife, so very slowly, on the countertop.